Okay.
Islam. Awesome. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Group 6's presentation on chapters 8 and 9 that speak to measurement and assessing external candidates. Now, over the past few weeks, you would have been introduced to several other topics related to staffing and the hiring process. For the first week, Group 1 presented on business and staffing strategies, and they spoke about areas of that concept related to resource-based view, the firm's business strategy, talent philosophy, and if you recall any of that, you'll recall them speaking about whether an organization sees an employee as a cost or as an investment. They spoke about staffing decision, and most importantly, they spoke about how a company or an organization can gain competitive advantage via the hiring process, and how important the HR personnel or HR itself is to the success of any organization. Now, the following week, Group 2 spoke to forecasting and planning, and they went in depth and looked at, forecasting the labor demand, forecasting supply demand, resolving the gap between the two, as well as staffing plan. Last week, you would have heard Group 4 speaking about sourcing, and that spoke to identifying recruits and recruiting. So today we will present on measuring, which is using data strategically in the hiring process. We'll also, within the topics of chapters 8 and 9, look at evaluating the effectiveness of an assessment tool as it relates to hiring and shortlisting and selecting persons. So you see ties back to previous chapters, as well as the relationship between the assessment tool and some areas of job performance. And the relationship between the assessment tool and job performance, that is called validity. So please, ladies and gentlemen, look out for terms terms as these: validity, reliability, and efficacy. We will also speak to how a firm can actually assess the return on investment based on how they use data in the hiring and staffing process. Now, I know when some of you hear about numbers and calculation, you immediately put up a barrier, but not to worry. We have a team of well-prepared and well-informed group members to take you all through the process. I will go ahead and introduce these persons to you now. Latoya. Now, once I've completed the overview, I will then hand over to Abigail, who will speak to you about measurement and describing data and completing the summary. Nicola will speak to you about interpreting data, followed by Latoya, who will speak to you about using data strategically, as I mentioned earlier. Shanae will then take the baton and speak about the characteristics of using useful measurements, and then she will hand over to Chantal Hardy, who will go in depth and give a comprehensive overview about creating and validating the assessment systems during the hiring process. Following Chantal, we'll then have Malcolm, who will speak to the firm's external assessment goals, and then I will complete with external assessment methods and the summary. So ladies and gentlemen, sit back, relax, get your pen and paper, take notes, and feel free to ask questions at the end of it. I will now hand over to Abigail, who will vivaciously take you through her aspect of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Philip. Thank you very much. Okay, so measurement. We'll be looking at chapter 8, measurement. And in this chapter, we will delve into the importance of measurement in strategic staffing decision. We will see where measurement provides a foundation for key staffing concerns, and we will if we can bring our mind's eye back to job analysis at the start of the semester, where we looked at how we use measurements and we looked at how we can measure. We saw the importance of measurement in measuring job characteristics and relating them to human characteristics. In this section, we will look at what measurements we will use and why it is important to use these measures. So at the end of this chapter, Group 6, we anticipate you learning the importance of measurements in staffing, how to understand data patterns, We'll look at some graphs. We'll see what these patterns mean and make assessments based on the patterns that we see. We will also take a look at correlation and regression and how these are used, knowledge about practical and statistical significance within staffing. We will take a deeper look at reliability and validity as it relates to the staffing process. And finally, the importance of standardization and objectivity. And this chapter depicts how HR practitioners should make strategic staffing decisions as objective as possible. So let's get right into it. We will look at the importance of data analytics. Okay, so strategically using data analytics is tactical to the success of an organization, right? Data is used to make selection decisions in the staffing process. And as Phillips and Gully 2015 has highlighted, it refers to the process of using data and analytical systems to arrive at optimal decisions, including statistical analysis of data. So we will then understand that data analytics can help an organization in a very important way. So first of all, it guarantees, before we go into measurement, it guarantees that they have a high quality workforce, a talented and informed hiring and training and succession planning process. It also considers strategies for downsizing and layoffs. And we need to note that the more accurate our data is the more beneficial it will be to the organization. It will help the organization to understand things as to who to hire and who to promote. And the reverse is also true. If the data analytics isn't in order, then the organization can run the risk of hiring the wrong people. They can end up in legal situations and, choosing the wrong candidate. So we see where data analytics is very important. So let's get into measurement. What is measurement? All right, so measurement speaks to numbers that have value or meaning to us. So we realize that numbers on their own have no meaning. Measurement is the process of assigning numbers according to some rule or convention to aspects of people, jobs, job success, or aspects of the staffing system. So for example, interview ratings, knowledge test scores, and performance data are measures used to select employees. So let's say, for example, Nicola goes for an interview and she is rated at a 30, right? This 30 by itself really has no meaning to us. We have to attach labels or meanings to it to get an understanding. So yes, we have to attach labels and meanings to it to have an understanding of what it is that we're speaking about. The number 30 by itself really has no meaning. All right, so measures relevant to the staffing process, measures relevant to the staffing process, assess the characteristics of the job. It allows the firm to create job requirements and job reward matrices. And it is an integral part of the staffing system. So we'll see integral parts of the staffing system such as the number of days a job posting is run for. So for example, how long, the job can be posted on Caribbean Jobs, for example, or in the newspaper. These things will be outlined in the firm's recruitment policy. We will look at the characteristics of the job candidates, such as personality or ability, and we can use personality tests as a means of measure. Staffing outcomes, such as the performance of the employee or the turnover rate. These measures allow the organization to improve the staffing system through identifying particular patterns and relationships. And now we will look at what is data. And we see here where data is the numerical outcome of measurements. And there are two types of data. We have predictive data and we have criterion data. So for predictive data, predictive data is used to make projections about an outcome. They predict performance on the job. So for example, based on your qualification, so if it is that I'm applying for a job and I have a master's degree in human resource development, I'm expected to have particular competencies on the job. Predictive data is what would show us this. We see it also with intelligence tests and same with personality tests. With predictive data, how one performs on a test is how they're expected to perform on the job. However, with criterion data, we look at the outcomes in and of themselves. So for example, with turnover rates, you simply look at the data and what it is that you see, it is how it is interpreted. Same thing with job performance or job success. We also see this with rate of promotions, absenteeism rates, time to hire, time to productivity. So let me speak briefly about the time to hire. So particular positions may have a particular time in which they should be filled. We look at how quickly these posts are filled, time to productivity, for how the learning curve could have started low when the individual started the organization, but then, we look at the progression of the individual. So looking at all of this would come under criterion data. And now we will look at describing and interpreting the data. And we need to understand that for data to be useful, it must be interpreted. And the tools used to describe and interpret data is dependent on the type of measurements. And we see here the different types of measurements. We have nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio measurements. All right, so with nominal measurements, numbers are simply used to categorize, classify. It doesn't have any qualitative meaning per se, but it is used just as a label. So for example, gender, race, a female can be labeled 1 and a male labeled 2, but it doesn't mean that there's any particular rank or anything like that. It's simply just a label. With ordinal measurements, we now see where there is rank, where there is order. So we have first, second, third. We will see this rank, for example, in sorting candidates that may have a high school level education, a bachelor's degree, master's level. So we can see a ranking there. Same thing with income rates. One may have previously received less than 70,000, another between 70,000 and 100,000, and another more than 100,000. So we see a different rank, first, second, third. Then let's quickly look at interval measurement. With interval measurement, we not only look at the score by itself, but we look at what happens between the scores. So let's say Nicola and Malcolm went to be interviewed, and Nicola got an interview rate of 30 and Malcolm got an interview rate of 50. We not only look at the scores by themselves, but we look to see what is happening in between. Why is it that Malcolm got 20 more than Nicola? And with ratio measurement now, it is similar to interval. However, there's a true zero that is attached. So it is possible for it to be completely none. For example, with typing speed, let's say Malcolm is at a 10 and Nicola is at a 0. It would then mean that Nicola cannot type at all. He's not able to type at all. So we will look at, as we get further into the chapter, these things will open up to us and we will have a deeper understanding of it. And Nicola will now tell us more about how we interpret data.
Thank you so much, Abigail. For those of us who did not gravitate to statistics, welcome to this session. Let me see if I can assist you to understand the relevance of interpreting data to an HR practitioner. So we start with scores. What is scoring? Scoring refers to the assigning numerical value during measurement, and that's from our prescribed text, Phillips and Gully 2015. So data, as Abigail said a while ago, and expounded so clearly, is often represented in scores or raw scores. Raw scores are just unadjusted scores on a measure. And raw scores are further broken down into standard scores or criterion reference scores. And standard scores just refers to a person's score that lie in comparison to the reference group. So a candidate who types at 90 words per minute, that's how you have to refer to for that score. So the norm reference measure, it indicates the scores are compared to others in the reference group. Example, your top 3. And also data is represented as percentile scores. And these are just the raw scores that have been converted in an expression of percentage of people who score at or below that score. Next slide, please. So with raw scores, they can be represented on a normal curve. So a normal curve is a distribution, is a representation where our scores follow the normal distribution criteria, where they are plotted on a line, and at the end it shapes as a bell curve. So under the curve is where we have our possible probabilities. And the normal distribution is just the probable distribution that at the middle or the mean, it has a mirror image on either side. So back to percentile scores. As an HR practitioner, how does percentile apply to us? Percentile score for us, it validates a reason for making a competitive offer to a candidate. And I will mention here a situation that Michelle mentioned some times ago where she had a good talent that she wanted to recruit for her organization, but the offer was not competitive enough. So Michelle could have used the percentile scores to take back to the hiring manager to validate her point that a competitive offer for this candidate would be the best thing in the interest of the organization. Percentile scores can also be used to evaluate compensation offers to see if our staff are compensated competitively, so they won't be looking for a better offer somewhere else. And I must mention here that percentiles, the unit of percentiles is percentiles. And percentile scores are not the same as percentages. So we speak to, next we speak to central tendencies, which are the central scores or the midpoint. And that speaks to the mean, the mode, the median. So the mean is just the average of all the scores that we have. The mode is the most frequent or common scores. Or the median is the score that falls in the middle of all scores. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we speak next about variability and what it is. This just describes the scores that are disseminated around the midpoint. So if somebody has a work score of 76 out of 100, but the mean would be a score 70. So the variability just shows you how the scores are calculated around or in relation to the mean. So we speak to range. And range is just the difference between the highest score and the lowest score. We also speak about outlier, and that's just and that's a score that is higher than the average score. And then we also speak about variance, which is mathematical measure of the spread based on the squared deviation of the score from the mean. And what does standard deviation basically refers to? It refers to how the score spreads on the curve. And now we speak to standard scores, back to standard scores. So standard scores basically are converted raw scores. And this indicates where an individual's score is in comparison to the reference group. So common scores, common standard scores, are basically referred to as the z-scores. And what the z-score calculates is the amount of deviation calculated from the raw score that is above or below the mean. And the mean again is the average or of all the scores. So the formula for a z-score is the individual's raw score minus the reference group mean, and that is now divided by the reference group standard deviation. Okay. Let us see if all that information can be used to interpret figure 8.1. So on figure 8.1, we have a bell curve. And the bell curve, the standardized scores are 0, a +1, a +2, +3. So it goes up by 1. And the percentile scores are there. So at the standardized score of 0, the percentile score is 50. And the test score for 2 tests, X and Y, are 50 for X and 100 for Y. So what does this mean to an HR personnel? It just means that the standard scores are the mean, the mode, and the median is at the peak. And that is where the symmetry, speak earlier about the mirror image from the 0 score. So the bell curve is a mirror image to the positive numbers, to the left of, which is negative numbers. All right. And we'll now speak to table 8.1. Let us see what all these terms that was mentioned earlier, what it means to a table representation such as this. So here we see Felix, Sue, and Lynn and Pear. But just for time constraint, I will just deal with Sue and Pear. So we can see 2 tests, the interview scores of those tests and the job knowledge test scores. So the standard scores for both tests are used to calculate the overall scores. Because we know that back in maths class, if you have an X and a Y, you cannot add them, or you have to bring them to a standard score where you can now calculate. So these scores were calculated to a standard score, and then now we can add, subtract the standards units. And that's why for Felix, we have a negative 1.1 standard score for the interview and a positive 1.2. So for Sue, here she has a positive 1.1. And looking off the bat, I think Sue will be the person of choice higher for this. How do I come to that conclusion? At the interview, she got 22 from the scores, and she got a 77. So when the standard scores were calculated, she got a positive 1.3, and she got a negative 0.2. But when the standard scores were added together, she came out with a positive 1.1. I compare her with Pear, and I think I like Pear for some reasons, because Pear got a job knowledge test of 80, but he had an interview test of 17, which gave him a standard score of a negative 0.4. When his standard overall score was calculated, he got a negative 0.2. But there are cases where, and Philip will will elaborate on that, where the interview process, there were different conditions. What happened that Pear had a low score for his interview. So Sue will fall in the positive 1, that's to the right of the mean, the standard score 0, and peer would fall to the left of the standard score 0. And I turn to the final diagram. The other slide, please. Yes, and this now is the shifting of the normal curve. So the normal curve that the HR personnel would like to have to select their talents from is the current talent pool in the center. But sometimes our curve may, for some reasons, be to the extreme right, which is good, perfect, if there was such a condition, or to the extreme left, which is not so of a good condition. So if your curve is to the extreme left, it means that you need a strategic sourcing and recruitment approach to get these persons to not hire these persons or have them into your job pool. But the passive job seekers are the ones that could already be employed. So because they're already employed, they may be looking for a more competitive offer. So the bell curve in the middle is what we strive to have to analyze. I now hand over to Latoya, who will explain to you how to use data strategically. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. Okay, class, let's take a look at using data strategically to support staffing. Effectively using data analytics to make decisions is the cornerstone of a firm's success. This according to Phillips and Gully 2015. The recruitment process is a valuable collection of data that, when extracted carefully, reveals important information on whether or not a candidate will be the high-performing employee your organization is looking for. It is the difference between making decisions based on a gut feeling or making them based on facts. The first term under the microscope is correlation, and this looks at the relationship between two variables or characteristics. In other words, how does one thing affect the other? Does it even have an effect, and how can we use this in the decision-making process? Okay, let me take a look at our class list so I can make an example that will bring it all closer home. All right, okay. So consider that Anne is the hiring manager at JPS, and her marketing department has been underperforming due to extremely poor supervisory skills. All right, so she recently hired a marketing director, and this director, even though she has met the criteria of an MBA and 2 years supervisory experience, has not been doing a good job in terms of supervising the team. Now, if Anne was aware of the correlation between years of supervisory experience and job performance, she would have been able to make an informed hiring decision or seek the necessary approval to arrange training for the director as necessary. So, having established what correlation is, let us jump to correlation coefficient. When you hear this term, which is also referred to as Pearson's R or the bivariate correlation, think of a single number which ranges from -1 to +1. To help you remember, you can say R is for relationship. Therefore, if R equals 0, then there is no correlation or relationship between the two factors. If the relationship, however, is R equals +1, then there is a definite positive relationship. One affects or causes the other. And for R equals -1, this means that there is indeed a relationship, however, it is a negative relationship. So a positive correlation is a relationship between two variables in which both variables move in the same direction. And this is when one variable increases as simultaneously with the other. So X increases by 10, Y also increases by 10. For an example of a positive correlation may be that the more Shanae reads, the better she does in her exams. Whilst a negative correlation is a relationship where one variable increases as the other decreases, and vice versa. So the more time Nicola arrives late for work, the less time she has to get things done in the day. Where it is possible to predict with a reasonable high level of accuracy the values of one variable based on the values of the other, the relationship between the two variables is considered as a strong correlation. A weak correlation is where, on average, the values of one variable are related to the other, but there are many exceptions. Let's look at another term, curvilinear relationship. So unlike the linear relationship, which follows a straight path, meaning it's either negative or positive, the curvilinear relationship may be positive up to a certain point, and then it becomes negative. For example, a key variable for customer service representatives at Dungeon Falls and Park is cheerfulness. The more cheerful a customer service representative is, the higher the customer satisfaction. But this is only up to a certain point, because when the rep is too cheerful, customers might perceive them as being fake or annoying, bringing down their satisfaction level. As anybody granny would say, too much of one thing no good. The same is true for too less. Similar cases can be made for characteristics such as conscientiousness, compromise, or intelligence, among others. So what we can note thus far is that the type of correlation we use when recruiting is dependent on the position we are trying to fill. What are the characteristics that we are looking for? If you've been to an interview within the last decade, you would have noted that measures such as case studies or aptitude knowledge tests, which Philip will speak to more a bit later, are now more prevalently being used as part of the recruitment process. What is being sought through these instruments is whether a person who scores high on these measures will be a top performer on the job, or whether they would perform lower on the job. So the correlation here is between the scores and job performance. Does one influence the other, and how? So uses of correlation coefficients include relating time to fill a job with higher quality, relating the school a candidate attended with job performance, or relating business size with staffing levels. Now, visually representing this data is very important, and correlations are expressed diagrammatically on scatter plots. Scatter plots are graphical illustrations of the relationship between two variables. Remember, we've been talking about two variables. So correlation, relationship between two variables, and scatter plots are used to represent these, all right? So in figure 8.4 on the graph, we will notice on the right that it shows low correlation or very little relationship. That is R equals 0.5. Compared to the graph on your left, which there is a perfect correlation. As you can see, the line goes straight up, but you will find that in real life that this does not exist. The average you'll maybe find between 0.30 to 0.70. So for R equals minus 0.43, this represents a moderate correlation. Example, a person does good on a test, but does not perform below expectation, or vice versa. So they don't do bad or they don't do well, they're moderate. This is best used when testing negative attributes in individuals. All right, negative R equals 0.04. Usually used when looking at stress and conflict scores. So there are times when having a strong negative correlation would be a good thing. And that's when we're looking at negative characteristics, such as stress, as mentioned before. Now, another term to note is predictor variable. Remember, we mentioned that there are two variables in this relationship. The one that is used to tell the value of the relationship, that is, how much one thing affects the other, is known as the predictor variable. It is used to predict the value of an outcome. For example, using test scores to predict performance, as in the example R equals negative 0.05 above. The greater the correlation of the given predictor with the predictors of a criterion, the more useful the predictor will be. Now, I know that's been a mouthful, but the good news for us as HR professionals is that correlation can be calculated using spreadsheets in Excel or statistical softwares such as SAS, SAS, and SPSS, which are data management softwares. All right, so let's jump into interpreting correlations. Correlations are not foolproof. In fact, measurement errors do occur, and Shanae will expound on this topic a bit further in the presentation. But for now, let us just look at a regular survey. There is usually a margin of error because of the sample we've selected. This is where our term sampling error comes into play. So a sampling error is a deviation in sampled value versus the true population value due to the fact that the sample is not representative of the population or biased in some way. So even randomized samples will have some sampling error since it's only an approximation of the population from which it is drawn. Now, the usefulness of a correlation can be evaluated by considering statistical significance and practical significance. Statistical significance indicates only that you have sufficient evidence to conclude that an effect actually exists. So it does not guarantee that the relationship or the predictor is useful. When the sample is small, the strength of the relationship must be large because of the possibility of sample error. A statistical significance is stated as a probability and indicates a given predictor's chance of yielding similar validity coefficients with different sets of applicants. So it must be able to be repeated. If you do it again, you should be able to get a similar result. Practical significance or correlation of a correlation refers to the magnitude of the effect. There can be no practical significance unless the relationship is also statistically significant. If the sample is large enough, a small correlation can be considered justifiable in the case of practical significance. Now, our next topic is regression, and Chantal will take us through that.
Thank you, Latoya. All right, so for today's class, we're going to be focusing on multiple regression and its usefulness to human resource practitioners. So regression is very important because it helps us to assess job performance and how to determine how valid it is in determining the selection process of a candidate being considered. So if you look at the diagram before you, you will observe the first diagram, that is. You will notice that X and Y are actually correlated, whereas X and Y are correlated, whereas Z and Y are also correlated. But X and Z, on the other hand, there's no correlation existing. So that's the first diagram that you're looking at. So below the first diagram, you're seeing where X and Z, they're highly correlated, but yes, they're highly correlated with Y And that is something as an HR practitioner you would not necessarily want. You actually want to be able to make predictors or make prediction that cover unique aspects of what you're covering in your assessments. When you look at the right diagram, which speaks about the more typical example, you're looking at, you want to have a small overlap existing between more than one variables. So let's say you're looking at your predictor variable as X and Z, which includes, let's say, cognitive ability test and structured interview scores. You would want it to have a small overlap existing within all three diagrams, or not diagram, but circles really. And the why that you're looking at speaks about the job performance. So that's something that you want to bear in mind. So when you're choosing predictors, it actually predicts job performance, and the goal is to have minimal overlap between them and maximum overlap existing with each predictor. So those are some of the things that you have to be mindful of when you're doing your multiple regression. I will now hand over to Latoya again.
Okay, thank you, Chantal. So just to sum things up, by generating and using the right data to your advantage, you can develop a staffing strategy that helps your organization to grow and thrive and validates your position as a good business partner. Shanae will now shed some light on the characteristics of useful measures.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Latoya. I will now look at the characteristics of useful measurements to staffing. So we all know that in staffing, finding the best suitable candidate for function of HR, right? And therefore having effective selection depends to a lot on the characteristics of the assessments used. So I will focus on reliability and safety, which are key concepts used to evaluate the quality of an instrument. So first slide, we will look at reliability. Is reliability. So reliability refers to the consistency of a measure in assessing results. So whenever we're assessing reliability, some of the questions that we seek to answer is, for example, if I did a test today and I retake that test, if I did a test yesterday, sorry, and I retake that test today, I would want to look at, okay, do my results similar? Are the results that I get today similar to the ones that I get yesterday? Or if I should retake a test tomorrow, retake that same test tomorrow, will my results still be similar to the test that I got previously? Or if I retake the test next week, next month, or even next year? So really what I get at is that a reliable test, they should provide results that are similar regardless of when the test is taken. So for example, if a candidate consistently scores high on a cognitive aptitude test, then we can deem these results to be reliable. Whereas if we have a candidate who they score high on a test today, they score low the next time, they score probably mid-range, we can see that these scores, they're very inconsistent and therefore unreliable. So although minor differences can be expected if a test is taken at different in time, we shouldn't be having drastic changes or differences. But there are instances where it does occur and scores do fluctuate radically. And it would be due to these following reasons. Firstly, temporary physical or psychological state. So the respondent's state of mind or their mood at the time in which they're taking the test can actually influence their performance. So for example, let's say it's your first time taking, or a candidate's first time taking a test, right? They're extremely nervous, they're anxious. Whereas their second time taking a test, they may be more relaxed. We can see where this difference in state can affect how they perform, or if for one time taking the test, they were feeling motivated and another time they felt demotivated. All of these factors would affect a person's performance. Similarly, environmental factors. So differences in the environment can also impact results. So for example, if a candidate takes a test, and let's say the first time when they take the test, the room is very quiet and they're able to concentrate. And then the second time around taking the test, the room is noisy, there are lots of distractions and disturbances. We can see where this would adversely affect their performance. So thirdly, version or form of the measure. So for a lot of these measures, they normally have more than one form. So for example, let's say you have a recruiter and they're administering a math test or intelligence test. For the different forms, they may have, because there are different forms of that same test, you may find where one test, the questions may be a bit more challenging in comparison to the other, which will affect the ratings for the candidates. And lastly, different evaluators. So in certain tests or situations, scoring is done by multiple raters. For example, like in panel interviews. In these cases, we may find where persons that rate a candidate different panel interviews. Sorry for that. In these instances, we may find where persons, the raters, may rate a candidate differently, right? And this may be attributed to their differences in training or their level of experience or their frame of reference. And all of this would influence how they would score that candidate. All right, so these 4 factors that I just explained, yes, are all sources of measurement error in assessment processes. And this leads me now to types of errors. So random error refers to error that is not due to any consistent cause. So for this type of error, it's very unpredictable. It's completely due to chance. And if a test is repeated, that same error cannot be replicated. So for example, like a person's state of mind or the weather outside, you cannot replicate that exact moment. So no matter how careful we might be with our instruments, are always subjected to some form of random error. But what we can do to limit this is have standardized testing or standardized assessment processes. Secondly, systematic error. So these types of error, they produce consistent and predictable errors, right? So this type of error, it always affects the measure the same way each time or by the same amount or the proportion. So for example, let's say we have a scale. Instead of starting at 0, it has a defect and it starts at 10 pounds. So what we would expect is that each time we weigh something on that scale, or measurement would be 10 pounds over the actual weight. And this would be an example of systematic error because it would affect it the same way on a consistent basis. Deficiency error, this refers to aspects of specific attributes that is excluded from a construct that we're trying to measure. So for example, let's say that a company, they want to hire IT specialists, right? And the candidate is given a work sample to test their IT ability. On this work sample now, they're only tested on troubleshooting, but we know that the roles and the responsibilities of an IT specialist is much more than that. They have to do installing, configuring, maintaining of software and all of that, but the test excludes this. So this would be an example of deficiency error. And lastly, contamination error. And this occurs when factors that are unrelated to what we're trying to measure or assess is being observed in our results. So for example, if a rater, and I know we all remember rater biases from previous classes where we talk about halo effect and stereotypes, similar to me, etc. So let's say a rater is judging a candidate, right? Instead of judging them on their performance, they judge them based on, okay, we went to the same school or we go to the same church, so therefore I will score you highly. That has nothing to do with their job performance, and therefore it would be considered contamination error. So to the next slide. Yes, so this diagram, it illustrates the relationship between deficiency, contamination, and relevance. So using my previous example of an IT specialist, right? the troubleshooting that was included in our measure would be included in the overlapping section labeled relevance because it was included. The installing, configuring, and maintaining that we didn't test for the candidates for, that would be located at the top at the area labeled deficiency. And below, the rate of bias would be an example of contamination. So moving on to interpreting reliability coefficient. So the reliability of a measure is indicated by the reliability coefficient, and this is normally expressed as a number between 0 and 1. And as Latoya stated before, a reliability coefficient of 0 means that there's no relationship. A reliability coefficient of 1 would mean that there is perfect relationship, but we know that this is highly unlikely. So as demonstrated in table 8.2, what we would want for our instruments is to have measures that are a reliability coefficient, that is as close to 1 as possible. So in staffing with our instruments, what we try to do, or what we would ideally want, are instruments that have a reliability coefficient of at least 0.7 or higher. And what this would translate, or what this means to us, is that we are at least fairly confident in how we are assessing and interpreting candidate scores on a consistent basis. So, and anything below 0.7, we wouldn't want that, because that wouldn't be of any use to us when we're measuring the abilities of our candidates. So moving on, so there are 4 types of reliability. There is test retest, and this indicates the repeatability of test scores over time. We have alternate or parallel form reliability, and this speaks to the different forms of a test for the same measure and how consistent the scores are. And normally with this type of reliability, the test can be used interchangeably. And for internal consistency, this would indicate the extent to which items on a test measure a construct. So the items on this specific measure would be homogeneous in nature. So if we're testing for mathematical skills, we wouldn't expect to see science questions in our measure. And lastly, inter-rater reliability, and this indicates how consistent test scores are likely to be if rated by 2 or more raters using the same item, scale, or instruments. So now I'll be focusing on standard error of measurements. And what this really refers to is the margin of error that is expected in an individual score because of an imperfect reliability of the measure. So remember, I stated before that all of our measures will be affected due to random error. And that is what makes it imperfect. So the standard error of measurement represents the degree of confidence that a person's true scores lies within. And ideally, what we would want is for our measures to have a low standard error of measurement, because what this would translate to us is that the lower the standard error of measurement, the more accurate our instrument is. So let's say, for example, we have a standard error of measurement of 2, right? What this would mean is that if a candidate's true score lies within, if we have a standard error measurement of 2, right? What this means is that a candidate's true score is actually 2 points above or 2 places below that actual score. So let's say their observed score is 90. The candidate's actual score is it lies between 88 and 92. Thank you. And now I will look at validity and the importance of validity in measurement. So validity looks at how well, or the accuracy of a measure in assessing what it is designed to assess. So if we're looking at intelligence, or if we want to measure intelligence, we should have an intelligence test. Sorry about that. If we're measuring intelligence, then our instrument should be measuring intelligence. If we want to look at personality, then our instrument should be measuring personality. And what this really translates to us is that our measure is valid. Whereas on the other hand, remember, reliability looks at the consistency of a measure. It is important to note that a measure that before a measure can be considered valid, it has to be reliable. And next slide, please. So the first figure, the one to the extreme left, labeled reliable but not valid, tells us that our test is consistent but is not measuring what it is supposed to measure. The second diagram, it tells us that our instrument is neither reliable nor valid, so it doesn't measure what it claims to measure, nor is it measuring it consistently. And the last diagram, it illustrates that our measure is both reliable and valid. Yes. Okay, thank you. So moving on to validation. Validation is a process of establishing the job relatedness of a measure. So in order to be sure a measure is useful and valid, we must collect evidence relating the measure to our job, to the job. So there are three types of validation. First, we have content-related validation, and this ensures that only items relevant to the job behaviors are being assessed. Criterion-related validity or validation demonstrates the statistical relationship between scores from a measure and the criterion. And with this type of validation, we're examining if the test results correlate to external criteria, for example, job performance, right? And lastly, construct-related validity or validation refers to the degree to which a test measures what it claims to be measuring. Next slide, please. Thank you. So face validity simply refers to the extent to which a test appears to measure what it is intended to measure. For this type of validity, it's highly subjective, but it is important, especially to job applicants, because how applicants perceive the test, if they look at the test and they think that it is, they want to know that what the test is assessing them on is actually important to their role. And for validity coefficient, this assesses the strength of the relationship between the test results and your criterion variable. Next slide, please. So validity coefficient, normally they don't exceed 0.4. And this is because humans were complex, right? And no single measure will be able to fully predict a person's job performance. So normally it would range between 0.35 to about 0.5. Next slide. So when we're evaluating a validity coefficient, we must consider a few things. So any adverse impacts that may be associated with our tool, the number of applicants, number of currently successful employees, the cost of hiring, the cost of selection of the selection tool, and the probability of hiring a qualified applicant without using a scored assessment tool. And lastly, validity generalization. And what this simply refers to is the generalizability of our measure. Without how can we generalize our findings to other populations without doing further research? And this is normally used or done using a technique called meta-analysis, which is simply combining multiple findings or multiple results to determine if results can be applied to all situations or if it would be different for different situations. So I will now hand over to Chantal, who will take you through the remaining characteristics.
All right, thank you, Shani. All right, so I will be focusing on using existing assessment methods, selection errors, standardization and objectivity, and creating and validating an assessment system. So according to Phillips and Gully, the writers pointed out that using a validation study or an assessment system is an expensive venture to undertake by yourself in terms of your organization. So at times you will find that companies will rather to use the services of other organizations who specialize in these services or in offering these services. You can go to the next slide, Latoya. So when we speak about using existing assessment methods, Phillips and Gully pointed to 5 considerations that we must take into consideration when pursuing to use an assessment system in our organization. So 1, it must have available validation evidence supporting the use of the measure for specific purpose. So in other words, research must be evident to support the claims about the assessment tools, such as the criterion-related validation, content-related validation, and construct-related validation that Shani would have spoken about. The second consideration is to bear in mind the possible valid uses of the measure. So in other words, it must be able to predict job performance because the tools should be able to provide valuable information about a person's aptitude, their attitude, and also provide information about future developmental goals or potential of an employee, because it can possibly assist in succession planning as well. The third consideration is a similarity of the sample group on which the measure was developed with the group or groups with which you would like to use the measure. So what this means is to say that when you're purchasing an assessment tool, you will need to ask yourself as the HR practitioner or as the users of this system, if it is that the sample that was done in the previous, in the tool that you're interested in purchasing for your organization, is if it is relevant or it represents your sample in your organization. So take, for example, the staff complement of your organization. So let's say I'm using an assessment tool that looks at academic staff, ancillary staff, technical staff, and administrative. I hope I'm not repeating that, but yes, you want to ensure that there's some similarity between the samples that are being used. When we speak about the adverse impact evidence as a final consideration, we're looking at taking into consideration protective groups. You don't want to exclude these persons, but you would want to have or make reasonable accommodations for these persons when you're selecting your assessment methods. So in Jamaica, we have a company called the Security Administrator Limited, which is known as SAL. So it's a joint partnership between Kingston Wharves and the Port Authority of Jamaica. They specialize in helping businesses identifying employees who are the right fit for the job and the right time. So that's something that they specialize in. So you may find that they have assessment tools for the organization that includes a job profile or candidate profile assessment, as well as a personal leadership and potential assessment. So those are tools, instruments that you may find that your very own organizations may pursue when selecting someone for their assessment. So the goal of any assessment system is really to make informed recruitment decisions, reduce risk, reduce recruitment costs, and lastly, to increase employee retention. So you can move to the next slide, Latoya. So Phillips and Gully would have spoken about 10 tips, 10 assessment tips rather, but what we're actually going to just look at a few of these tips. So you want to use a variety of tools because no single measurement is foolproof in terms of being 100% valid and 100% reliable. You want to use a mixture of assessment instruments. You may take a whole person approach that looks at a variety of tools to measure an individual. You also want to ensure that the administrators are trained in using these assessments. So you're holding these persons accountable in ensuring that standard is maintained. So in executing the assessment system, you want to ensure that the same time allotted to one candidate is actually given to all the persons vying for that position. So that's something that you have to bear in mind, because you don't want to allow a breakdown in the system to take place. You can move to the next slide, Latoya. When we speak about selection errors, so like we said previously, no assessment tool is foolproof. So therefore, they're subject to errors. And this is something that Phillips and Gully pointed out, and we have to recognize that this is a fact. So as a recruiter, you want to be cognizant of these things when hiring persons for the job. So there are two types of selection errors that exist. These are false positives and false negatives. What do we mean by false positives? So we're hiring the wrong person and the individual is unable to demonstrate his or her skill sets on the job. And with this error, it can carry the organization or allow the organization to ruin, well, the reputation of the organization to be ruined. So using the example of the Petrojam situation with the human resource manager, we can safely say that this was a false positive. In other words, this lady or this person would not have been able to demonstrate the skill set needed to effectively perform the job and really operate within the confinements of what the policies at Petrojam is. So that's something that we can look at as a false positive. When we speak about a false negatives, we're looking at underestimating a candidate in an interview as being a weak performer, but really and truly, when you think about it, this person would be a good hire. So HR practitioners have to recognize that this is something that exists. So for example, if you're taking someone as a chief information technology officer in your organization, and perhaps the person might not have done so well, you may assume that the person may not be able to perform, and you may extend or decline in providing feedback to the candidate. You may say to them that they were not considered for the post. And this person was later selected in, let's say, a rival company of yours. What you find happening is that you may hear news of this person really being successful in this organization. And then you're looking like, whoa, this person would have really been a good hire, a good fit in our organization. So that's what we mean by a false negatives. So our recommendation to reduce this type of error is really taking a whole person approach, where you look at a variety of methods or assessment tools that can be used to reduce the impact or reduce the effect of a selection error occurring. So we speak about standardization. We're looking at the consistent administration and use of a measure. So an example is that you want to ensure that the same instructions and the same time is given to complete an assessment, whether it is a skill test, an oral test, or a skill test, written test, or an oral test. That's something that you want to ensure that is maintained. So training becomes very crucial when you're issuing or administering a form of assessment. When we speak of objectivity, we want to ensure that your assessment is free from bias, free from personal judgment or bias. So an example could be hiring someone as a court stenographer, and you may require that the person should demonstrate a typing skill of 120 words per minute. So that's something that you may have to consider as an objective measure. So when we speak about subjectivity, we're now looking at allowing your personal judgment or biases to take place in the hiring decision or the selection processes. So for example, in the hiring decision, you can choose to include an independent party to sit on an interview panel. You can also recuse yourself from the process if you believe that there's a potential conflict of interest that exists. And you can also use multiple persons to sit in the hiring process. So those are some of the things that you have to bear in mind when it speaks about reducing subjectivity. When we speak about creating and validating an assessment system, Phillips and Gully would have really provided a compact means of how you can create this system, but what we did was to extract it into 7 steps. So we're saying that you can conduct a job analysis. You need to identify reliable and valid methods for measuring KSAs and O's and competencies. And step 3, you will need to create a system for measuring and collecting the resulting data. Step 4, ensuring that the resulting data has an appropriate mean and standard deviation, and this would have been covered by Nicola in her presentation. You want to then enter these scores into a regression equation in terms of part of what I would have touched on with Latoya. When we speak about step 6, you want to evaluate each measure. Shani would have touched on this briefly as well. And in step 7, you want to ensure that the selection rules that are developed to determine a passing score so that you can understand what the score means. Also, in creating and validating assessment system, you have to take into consideration 2 things: benchmarking and evaluating an assessment method. So benchmarking is all about comparing an organization's staffing data with other organizations within the industry who may provide the same or similar product that you provide. So for example, you may determine if at 30%, you would want to know if a 30% turnover in your industry, let's say a manufacturing industry, is acceptable. And if it is recognized in the industry that it is, then you know that that's not something to be concerned about. Whereas if a 30% is considered to be high, you will now need to understand what you need to do to reduce this turnover attrition rate taking place in your company. So benchmarking can take the form of application rates, the average starting salaries, the average time to fill, and the average cost per hire. When we speak about evaluating assessment methods, we're looking at validity, return on investment, the applicant's reaction, usability, adverse impact, the selection ratio, and base rate. Don't expound on 2. So if validity, we're looking at whether the assessment method predict what it is intended to predict. And return on investment, you want to really think about the financial return on making this investment in a new employee coming on. So you're looking at the average time to fill, the cost per hire, and the turnover rate. So just to give you a recap on what measurement is all about, it's important that when you're making your hiring decision, you have the right person being hired in the right job at the right time. So that's something that we always have to take into consideration. You want to also measure central tendency, which includes their mid, mode, and median that Nicola would have spoken about. And when we speak about correlation, we're thinking about the strength of relationship between your predictor variable and the outcome to determine if there's some relationship existing. And when we speak about standardization, we're looking at consistency. And when we speak about objectivity, we're looking at removing personal biases. So those are some of the summations of measurement, and I will now hand over to Latoya, who will take you through chapter 9. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chantal. So chapter 9 is about assessing external candidates, and our learning objectives for this chapter: identify different external assessment goals, describe what is meant by an assessment plan, describe different assessment methods and how each is best used, discuss how to evaluate external assessment methods, identify ways to reduce the adverse impact of an assessment method. Now, Phillips and Gully stated that the primary goal of external candidate assessment is typically identifying the job candidates who fit the person specification for the job being filled, and to identify people who would likely be poor performers and screen them out. Now, the assessment goals, as mentioned, as listed by Phillips and Gully, is maximizing fit, assessing accurately, maximizing the firm's return on its investment and its assessment system, generate positive stakeholder reactions, supporting the firm's talent philosophy and HR strategy, establishing and reinforcing the firm's employer image, identifying new hires' developmental needs, assessing ethically, and finally, and very importantly, legal compliance. Now, Malcolm will take you through the firm's external assessment goals.
Malcolm, we're not hearing you.
Unmute.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. So I will be looking at the firm's external assessment goals. So maximizing the fits. So one aim of assessment is to decide how well an individual fits into the company, work group, and job. So I'll be looking at person job fit, person group fit, person organization fit, and person vocation fit. And I will not be discussing all of them because of time constraints. All right. So the person job fit is the fit between a person's abilities, demand of the job, rewards of a job, and the degree to which the job meets the individual needs. So hiring manager must think about the type of occupation, position they are recruiting for, because it is important that they hire the right person with the requisite knowledge, skills, and abilities to perform the job well. So we have to take into account the job-related skills of the individual. Is the person intelligent? What are the knowledge, skills, and abilities they possess to do the job? What prior experience they have in a similar position? And importantly, will this person fit the specific role if they are hired? So with person job fit, if the job does not meet all the expected needs of the applicant, the match will not be ideal. And if the new employee is not effective, the staffing process cannot be considered as being effective. So person group fit is a match between an individual and his work group, including supervisor. So this type of fit is very important when recruiting for a team-oriented work environment. For example, an organization that works in teams is the Jamaica Constable Force. So members usually work in pairs or are a part of a task force. So with the possible fit, hiring manager will have to see how well the individual fit in the team. What is their conflict management style like? Will they be able to resolve conflicts respectfully? Are they adaptable to working in team? What expertise will they bring to the team? Will it complement the team and give the team a competitive advantage? Interpersonal interaction is also important. Will the person be able to communicate effectively both to the team, the supervisor, via email, in person, or telephone? And the person organization fit is the fit between an individual values, belief, and personality, and the culture of the organization. So this is how well the employee will fit into the company's culture. For example, Sagicor Group Jamaica prides itself on giving back to the community. So if the charitable arm of the organization should conduct an assessment for the job applicants, other than expressing their interest in the company, applicants will have to also demonstrate their previous involvement or their motivation matches the company purpose. Also, how their individual goals, values are aligned to the organization core values. The supplementary fit, the fits can be broken down into two: the supplementary fit and the complementary fit. So the complementary fit is when a person adds something that is missing in the organization or work group by being different from the others. So an employee may possess some knowledge or skill that a company needs. For example, an accounting firm may seek to hire a chartered accountant with expertise in high-tech accounting software systems to work with the existing core to upgrade the organization business process. And the supplementary fit occurs when persons has characteristics that are similar to those that already exist in the organization. So an organization may add similar workers to the existing core. So they're basically replicating the workforce. But the good thing about supplementary fit is that it can resolve an organization problem much faster than that of a complementary fit. For example, a secretary can easily be recruited and replace another secretary who was departed the company and perform similar duties. So we're going to look at other external assessment goals. So assessing accurately. So in assessing accurately, the method should be valid and it must accurately identify the best and worst job candidates. So to accomplish this, the HRN team must ensure that appropriate and valid tools are in place to conduct the assessment for the job. So now, how are we going to look at? Now we are going to look at this figure here. So for example, a test was administered. So whenever a test is administered, persons are either hired or not hired. So what we are seeing here, just looking at it, we want to know how we know when an assessment is successful. So an assessment is successful when job candidates falls anywhere in the top right-hand corner and the lower left-hand corner. So that is the true positive and true negative area. But what does that mean for the organization? What it means is that persons who falls in the true positive area are classified as good performers, and the true negative are those candidates who would have performed poorly. So, but what no hiring manager wants to happen in the assessment process is to hire applicants that falls within the false positive and the false negative area. What those two undesirable means is that the false positive area means that a job candidate of choice turns out to be a poor performer, and the false negative is not hiring someone who would have been a top performer. And with these two types of errors, one type can be more important than the other. For example, iris jobs for iris jobs, false positive can be particularly expensive. Can you imagine what would happen if a pilot or surgeon was hired? Next slide, please. So we are looking at the formula for return on investment. So whenever so here are some predictors. We have NH, number of people hired. We also have, I'm not seeing this, T, average number of years employees see in the position, T, RXY correlation between assessment method and job performance. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm not going to go through all of those. Yeah. All right. So when an organization invests in new employee recruitment, it hopes to save money by making successful hires and earn return on their investment. So after making an investment and an assessment system, the recruiting team will have to evaluate the system to ascertain if it was worth investing after paying for improved performance. So the formula will help to analyze, and the data will indicate if the current system is working. So external asset, we are going to continue with a few more external assessment goals in no particular order. Establishing and reinforcing the firm's employer image. So it is important that the goals, objectives, and attributes that make the company unique must be communicated at all times by stakeholders. So how is this going to be done? Messages can be placed on the company's website with video material, on appraisal platforms, in meeting with the recruiting team, and it should be done with every interaction with the recruit so that the desired image is reinforced. Assessing ethically. This is very important. Assessment goal is a very important one because HR practitioners and hiring manager must see to it that ethical practices maintained throughout the process. So how is this going to be possible? Well, the process must be transparent. Telling recruiters how information will be used and protected is very important. So every assessor must be well-trained, must be confidential, must avoid nepotism, similar to me, rate error, and the integrity of the system should not be brought into questioning. So in an article published by the Jamaica Gleaner Company on July 29, 2020, where it was revealed by the Auditor General Department that JUTC could not provide evidence that 8 senior managers were interviewed in accordance with guidelines. So as HR practitioners, we must not allow situations like these to happen. So these assessment process as a whole must be conducted ethically. So I will now hand over to Philip.
Okay, thank you very much for that comprehensive overview on measurement as well as assessment goals team. Thank you very much. I know for the class you heard quite a bit on numerical calculations and computations, so shake that off and get ready for the fun part of it, where I will quickly go through external methods used by organizations. Now we are aware that we are approximately 5 minutes to time, so I crave your indulgence and permission to just give you 5 extra minutes of some useful information that we can all use as HR practitioners as it relates to assessing external candidates. I crave your indulgence. Is that okay, Ms. Grace, Dr. Hall?
I'm not sure what you're asking me, Philip.
We anticipate that we might be a few minutes over. We're almost at
Philip,
time.
Philip, do what you have to do. I will tell you what my evaluation is at the end.
Thank you very much. So ladies and gentlemen, for this section, I will speak about several methods used by organizations to assist in the hiring and staffing process. Most of them you might already be familiar with, but I will go a bit further to speak to you about the validity, reliability, and efficiency of these methods, as you'd have heard earlier, as it relates to the role, the skill, the knowledge, and abilities needed for the particular job. For this section, I want the class to take note that for the external assessment process, it can be actually categorized in 3 categories: the initial screening methods, as well as the evaluative method and the contingency methodologies that are used. I will speak first to the evaluative method that are used for, the screening methods that are used by evaluators in the selection, hiring, and staffing process. Now, as Philip and Gully said, it is important that the candidate's assessment typically identify candidates who are suited for the job. However, it is equally important that we identify candidates that are not suited for the job, and that is called shortlisting. Now, in the initial screening methodologies, we have 4 that have been identified here as it relates to resume and cover letters, job application, as well as biographical data and telephone screening. Now, based on the validity and the reliability explained by previous class members, there is not enough evidence to show that a resume or a cover letter can actually determine how well someone will effectively perform on the job, particularly if they have the same amount of qualifications. As a matter of fact, nowadays you have persons who are professional resume and cover letter writers who will do that for you and nice it up and present it. So when a recruiter look on that nice cover letter, it's not a true determination if you can do the job just as well as someone with the same, how well it is composed. So the validity and reliability, although effective and well used, is not a determinant. Another in the screening process is job applications and blank weighted forms. A lot of persons, when they do job sending their resumes, oftentimes they're asked to complete some other information. Application form for some industries, they ask you nowadays to fill out an some additional information while you are online. The screening process and is weighted and helps to screen persons out. So for example, if you're applying for a role to be a manager, the question might ask, do you have managerial experience? Yes or no. If you select yes, you get a high score. If you select no, it is low. Likewise, if you're going to be a trainer or a teacher in a particular organization, it asks if you have training or teaching experience. Depending on the option that you select, it will grade you. And that actually is a part of screening out. So what the recruiter or rater will do will actually go for persons within the higher percentile bracket, as mentioned by Nicola earlier, when we talk about how to interpret data, and screen out persons below the line of that they require based on the job. Biographical data, likewise, is sometimes required, and it takes into consideration persons' interests, years of working, and information as well. And this is sometimes also helps to decrease adverse impact, where it helps to screen persons out. Now, the final in the list of initial screening methods that are more popularly used are telephone screens. Oftentimes, when you apply for a job, the organization will call you. And in our previous employment, I worked with Digicel for over a decade, where I was actually assisting with our recruitment as well. And what happened is that because the customer service environment, and based on the skills, knowledge, and attitude that's required, but for that role, they will actually have a ratings form. So you will actually analyze the speech, the diction, the interest in the company, your level hours that are available, and the person who's calling actually is rating you. And based on the score or the answers that you give, then you are invited to the second round of assessment, which is known as the evaluative method. So you see, for the screening methods, you can use these as HR practitioners before you actually invite persons to the second round, which is evaluative. Now, important to note as well in a class that when somebody actually sends in a job application, they are not a candidate, they are known as an applicant as well. And when you pass this phase of the screening process, you then go on to be a candidate, which puts you in the evaluative aspect of the external assessment. Now, I'll go through several of these evaluative methods used by the HR practitioners and explain to you how valid they are and reliable in determining whether or not a candidate has the requisite skills, knowledge, and attribute to perform in the long run in the company. So the first is cognitive and non-cognitive tests. This actually is given by some organizations. Now, the cognitive test actually helps to determine persons' reasoning, logic, eye for detail, and actually their sense of perception of what is required. So it's often in the form of a written assessment that is given. And you have organizations such as the JCF and the JDF who actually give you a written test. A lot of organizations, including where I work as well, within the customer service industry, where persons are actually asked to write to evaluate their level of communication and English, because we have overseas clients as well. So that's an example of a cognitive test. An example of a non-cognitive test will be that of what you call, then they assess your physical ability. Again, I refer to agencies such as the armed force, where persons actually have to go through rigorous exercises to ensure that they are fit for the job. Yes, Sharon Osborne actually, they said that how she behaved was not in keeping with the values of the organization as it relates to embracing diversity, as it relates to being philanthropic, and of course, being empathetic and sympathetic. And a lot of organizations will actually do a value assessment to ensure that you are in keeping with their values. The other is the personality assessment. Now, personality assessment actually has a low validity rate. Personality assessment doesn't really prove whether or not you're suited for doing a job. Oftentimes, you have industries such as the airline industry and those big on customer service will do a personality assessment. But really and truly, this is more effective when you are working in groups to determine how persons will work in groups. Malcolm actually earlier mentioned, person group fit or person organization fit. And this is where this tie in if you want teamwork and productivity and synergy within your organization. This could be used as well. And some of the big 5 personality tests are like extroversion, conscientiousness, emotional stability, agreeableness, and openness to experience. Integrity test is a big one as well. A lot of organizations, again, such as the armed forces, if you are doing interviewing for a position as a government official or a CEO or high managerial position, or within the banking industry, financial industry, persons are actually subjected to integrity tests to ensure that they are suited for the job and the role that is done. Polygraph test is the last test, is another test. This is also known as the lie detector test. Upon my research, I also realized and found out that the JCF, actually they do polygraph tests. As a matter of fact, they do a plethora of tests and a combination of these assessment tools to ensure that persons with the armed forces are suited. They do tests such as psychology test, polygraph test, antecedent test. This is known as background test. They do a medical job knowledge test as well as physical test. And as we speak about job knowledge tests actually provide you with scenarios related to the job to see how well you will actually be knowledgeable of the process. Interviews is a popular one. Now, in terms of interviews, we have structured interviews and we have unstructured interviews. Unstructured interviews is when you ask a variety of questions and you have different raters who are not necessarily trained, but they ask some questions as they feel like. This has a low validity based on our research and calculations. Structured interviews are more suitable in telling the validity and how in the long run predict how one should perform on the test. In structured interviews, everyone gets asked the same questions and the raters are actually trained to eliminate rater biases. Now, behavioral and situational and case study interviews is a critical one. In the organization I mentioned that I worked earlier, I worked at Digicel within the customer care department, and I actually assisted in crafting behavioral situational case studies to assess persons coming into the organization. It's big on customer service, and we will ask questions or behavioral questions which will actually ask you questions of how you dealt with something in the past. So we'll ask, tell us of a time when you assisted someone, tell us about how you dealt with it, while situations ask for the future. If a customer should come in front of you and they're irate, how would you deal with that customer? And based on the answer that you give, we can determine if you are full of empathy, exhibit willingness to help, and customer-oriented. For situations such as a team leader or a trainer, you get case studies where you actually give them a situation and see how well they will actually get that test, the answers actually rather. And you grade them based on that to see how they will coach persons to do the job well if they're coming late or they're performing less than desirable. Graphology is actually a low-rated test. It's actually the handwriting test to see if your handwriting actually qualifies you for the job. This has a validity rating of 0.02, almost next to 0. A situation where I was actually interviewed for a job as a trainer. And would you believe, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't get the job? When I went back for feedback, they told me that the students will not be able to read my handwriting when I mark the paper. I subsequently interviewed, however, and I got the job and that turn. And would you believe that I actually became the manager for that training department? So again, it goes to prove that graphology has a very low validity rating. Job simulations are required as well when it comes on to pilot and other jobs where you have to show your competence. Work samples speak to jobs such as project management, where they actually ask you for a sample of your job, or you're a marketer or an artist, a graphic designer. And social media checks are actually very important as well. Social media checks, a lot of persons headhunt, and they will go on your LinkedIn and they will Caribbean jobs as well. They will headhunt you, as well as Facebook and Twitter. So be careful what you put on your social media page, because recruiters are looking out for you. And of course, a popular one, reference checks. We're moving on to contingency measures now. Contingency measures, as by Philip and Gully, often talks about, on contingent on the job, you can either get a medical test, a drug test, or a background check. However, a lot of organizations actually kind of mix it up. Some put it in the contingency part, and some actually do it in the evaluative part. For example, I alluded to the JCF, where they actually do a drug test and a medical and a background check before the job is actually offered to you, and not contingent. So ladies and gentlemen, in summary, it's important that you do your assessment plan, and based on the organization, as well as the skills, knowledge, and ability, you can use one or a combination of external assessment methods to get the right candidate for your job. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you got something from our measurement and assessment, and I'll hand over to Abby to summarize.
Thank you very much, Philip. Very insightful. I just quickly want to make clear that in chapter 8, chapter 8 captured the great importance of measurement in the hiring and staffing process. We saw how measures such as central tendencies and measures of variability are useful for describing the distribution of scores. We looked at correlation and regression in understanding these scores, and the difference was illustrated between practical significance and statistical significance, validity and reliability, and standardization and objectivity. In chapter 9, we looked at the external assessment goals of an organization to ensure a candidate's suitability for the job. As HR practitioners, it is very important to remember these points as we build strong workforces. As Zig Ziglar once said, you don't build businesses, you build people, and they build businesses. Thank you very much. I know we have so many questions, and you guys are raring to go with them.
Okay. Let's have the questions. You can only have 40 minutes for questions. It is now 6 minutes to 8. Okay, instead of 1 hour, you can only have 40 minutes for questions. So let's use it wisely. What are the questions? Don't let me get into the list again tonight, please.
Hi, good night, Miss. Good night, everybody.
Who is speaking?
Oh, this is Yannick. Probably not familiar with this voice.
No, I can't see. I can't see everybody on the screen. So I have to identify yourself when you come on.
That's fine. All right, this question is for Philip. You mentioned the cognitive test in relation to, you're going back to it. Thank you very much. Right, evaluative methods. So do you have an idea of what the cognitive test looks like? And how does it work in relation to when you've already sent in a resume? Like what would be the point of the cognitive test?
All right, thank you very much for that question, Yannick. For a lot of, as I mentioned previously, organizations often use one or a combination of external assessment tools to evaluate the person who is doing the job to see if they are ready for the job. Now, cognitive tests, as you rightfully mentioned in one of those, and you asked, why is it important when you already have a resume? Now, as I mentioned at the start of my presentation, that a resume person, there are varying degrees of persons who do a resume, and I alluded to professional resume makers. Now, say for example, Yannick, we both have an MSc in HRD and we apply, and I asked a professional resume maker person to do my resume and application letter, and you did yours. Just looking at it on the surface, it might be so well crafted that you look at it, it might say, oh, your resume was, or mine, that was completed by the professional resume writer might be indicative of us doing the job better. However, an effective HR practitioner will actually go further, and particularly for a job that requires you to be able to function at a particular level, they would like to actually evaluate your logics, your perceptiveness, your eye for detail, as well as how your reasoning ability. Interestingly enough, we actually had an activity that we have that, if I may share with you, Latoya, that is something that is used to evaluate persons' cognitive abilities. And if you look at question number 2 on the screen, Latoya, if I ask you, how many of the 5 pairs of items listed below are exact duplicates? In 5 seconds, can you identify them for me?
Philip?
Miss?
This is something that should have been included in the presentation. You need to answer the question. You cannot take up the entire question and answer period going over another presentation.
Understood, Miss. So this is an example of what a cognitive test will look. You can go back to the question and answer slide. So they will ask how quick you are at reason and logic. They will ask how quick you are, how many answers you will get for certain places that require us to be quick thinkers and be able to exhibit a lot of logic and analysis, particularly in the industry that I work, Yannick. They as a process or analyst or a quality analyst or a reports analyst, they would like to evaluate your level of using Excel, for example. So they will give you certain things to put in a sheet and to see how well you are able to manipulate and give them the answer. So you need to know how to use Excel and analyze as well, and for other forces as well. So again, do not only rely on a resume or application form. A knowledge test will actually provide you with insights how some persons will actually relate to certain analytical processes.
May I explain the use of the cognitive test, please?
Thank you.
Normally, when your application is sent in, you're not given a cognitive test at that time. A cognitive test usually comes in the screening process, whether you have been asked to come in for an interview, and it's usually not in the pre-screening process. It's usually a part of the full interview where you have different type of selection tests that are administered. And depending on the type of job and the type of industry, the type of test will be selected. So you might be given an in-basket test if you applied, for instance, to come in as a secretarial assistant. They might give you what is called an in-basket test, which means that you are given several tasks within a job for a day, and you decide which ones you will select first, etc., and so forth. So depending on the type of the job, okay, there are different types of cognitive tests, and they're aimed at checking different things. As your text tells you, some of them will aim at testing how you can control certain environments, etc. Some of them will test your visual, auditory, and speech perception. So for instance, in the BPO industry, a lot of cognitive tests are administered. They'll administer a voice test. They want to hear how somebody speaks on the phone, so they administer a voice test. They might administer another test that's aimed at grammar, okay, even though it might be a verbal test, but they want to hear what somebody's grammar is like, etc. So different industries select different type of cognitive tests. There's also the physical ability test. So like if you go into the military or the JCF, they have certain physical ability tests that they will administer to you. How many pounds you can lift, how fast you can run up a set of stairs, how fast you can climb up a tree. In some cases, depending on what it is, JCF wouldn't use a tree, nor the military use a tree, but climbing is important, for instance, in the military. So they might give you a test that, you know, some of them might use rope and ladders, okay, in terms of some of those types of tests, okay? So they're looking for strength, flexibility, and endurance and coordination, etc. But those types of tests are usually part of what would be considered to be either the semi-final interview or the final interview, because some places will have 2 final interviews, depending again on the nature of the job, the importance of the job, the level of the job. But it's not done at the application process. And I think that's what I heard you asking. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, please correct me, Yannick. But I thought I heard you asking what is the relationship between sending in an application and doing a cognitive test. Am I correct?
Yes, Miss, just the relationship between both. If you're going to send in a resume with all of the fluff and niceness, then what would be the point of the cognitive test?
Well, there's 2 completely different things. A resume cannot speak to you in person. A resume is basically the paper to allow you to do the first pre-screen, like to see, okay, does this person on paper possess the experience we're looking for? Does this paper person possess the educational qualifications based on the ad that might have been posted? But that is not the interview. That is only the application process. As Philip rightfully said, you're an applicant until you're selected for an interview, then you become a candidate. So the interview now is to further explore whatever you sent in on that paper, because you cannot just hire somebody based on paper. Nobody does that. Nobody takes an application and said, okay, you're the best person for the job. No, because anybody can put anything on an application form. But what you have on paper and what you can do and what you can say is a different matter. And this is why a lot of times we also, even at the interview stage, ask for what is called work samples, depending on the type of job. Like for instance, if you're an accountant, they may ask you to bring in a sample of spreadsheets that you've been able to do. It's not good enough to just say on the resume that I am competent in Microsoft Office Suite. And then we also find in certain positions, like if you're going to hire a graphic artist, you want to see actual work samples, and some places will actually ask for them to be certified. So an application is only the beginning of the hiring process. Okay, please continue with your questions. I see Nicola has a hand raised.
Yes, Miss, I just wanted to add to the discussion a while ago.
Just a minute. Group, please handle your questions. Okay.
Just to add to the conversation about the test, what I know is that alluding to the JCF and the JDF, they also ask their candidates to do what entry-level test,
which is a written test.
Yes.
Right, so because they want to check their math ability, and their simple grammar knowledge, their simple grammar, general knowledge, etc.
Yes. So even if they have CXCs or any other standardized test scores, they still have to do that test before entrance.
Right, because a lot of their work also depends on being able to write reports and write even simple tickets and that sort of stuff. Okay.
That's correct, Miss. In our research, we found that they actually use 6 or 7 different methodologies for assessing, as I mentioned, the psychological test, which is quite intense, the polygraph test, the antecedent or background check, the medical test, the job knowledge test, and the fitness test. So that entity uses quite a number of the assessment methods.
And it's usually a mix, not just the cognitive test. Okay, please go on to the next question. What's the next question?
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Who's speaking?
This is Damian.
Yes, Damian, go ahead.
I have a question for Latoya, I believe it is, who spoke to the correlation coefficients. Now, you would have been describing the relationship between the 2 variables and how they relate to each other. But you also mentioned that there are margins of errors in the coefficient. They cannot be used or trusted. I want to know, how would a person be able to identify when you can use it and when it could not be used, since it can be incorrect at times?
Okay, so it's really a matter of its rating, not necessarily that it's incorrect, but what the relation, how strong the relationship is. So I'm bringing up a basic, all right, so this is the correlation. So what it's saying is that you have to look to see the level of correlation. So for example, if you're looking at a person's test scores and you want to rate it against how they perform on the job, if you get say a minus or a negative 0.10 to negative 0.330, that would be way too low for you to make a decision to say, yes, it's directly related. So if you get something moderate, like 0.68, then you could consider that. And as expected, a rate that you can definitely make a decision on would be a very high positive rate or negative rate, depending on what you're assessing. So it's really based on the score, which is why the idea of using the scatter plot, the scatter plots or the SAS system to plot the variables and decide how they relate to each other, because that is that is overall how you'll make the decision. It's based on the scoring that you get. So it's not going to be perfect, but it's how close it comes to perfect, basically.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just to add to that, Damian, there's also an assessment manual pertaining to the type of assessments that will actually guide the interpretation for the administrators of the instrument. So that is something that will help a lot in making a decision.
Yeah. Yes, a company usually establishes these standards in terms of what it looks for depending on the type of position. It will probably differ based on the position, and a lot of the companies that are doing a lot of hiring, especially sometimes in technical positions, see fit to establish what are the various standards by which you choose a candidate. How do you come up with a decision? So especially, as I said, in companies that are doing a lot of hiring, massive hiring, maybe for nurses, for technicians, that sort of stuff, they will pre-establish these standards so that once the tests are given, then they usually have the instruments that they just put them in the system and will tell them what the various correlations are like. Of course, some human judgment has to go in there as well, because as been pointed out, sometimes somebody will come up very strong in one area, weak in another area, but overall maybe still the best person. So there are a lot of those types of decisions that are usually made by an assessment team. Okay, and most of this is usually done in, as I said, very high level organizations where they're hiring, especially a lot of technical persons, or where they might be hiring on a national basis. Okay, meaning, they're looking at several locations, that sort of stuff. Okay, next question.
Hi, Belinda here. I have a question in relation to the assessment plan. Is there an assessment center? And if so, what is the role of the assessment center? I don't quite remember. I think it was perhaps Philip who had mentioned the assessment plan.
Yes, actually, I alluded to it, Belinda, and thanks for that question. Again, I harken back to organizations who would actually use varying levels of assessment to assess the level of skill and competence and abilities for a particular candidate. So there is a difference between an assessment plan and an assessment center. Now, the assessment plan, based on the organization, you can use and rank the assessment that will be used for a particular job role. Again, if we're in a customer service industry, we can actually rate customer focus, the attribute of customer focus, higher than you will hire at the highest level of the ranking. Then if the person is going to be working in a customer focused industry as an accountant, then you can rate that secondly. And it depends on the value and the objectives of the strategic objectives of the organization that you will want. And you, as such, craft your assessment plan based on the competence that you would like to elicit from that person, and you can rank these accordingly. As it relates to the assessment center, this is actually a grander scale of interview methods that persons will actually, it's akin to a workshop where it's a much longer and it has various components. Now, in my previous job, I assisted with crafting an assessment center, for example, for someone who will be coming in a supervisor position. They don't only rely on the resume or interview. They actually want to assess certain competencies such as leadership, analytical skills, coaching skills, time management skill, as well as presentation skills. So they will actually craft certain scenarios that you would need to do and put in certain scenarios, like a case scenario, and to assess your leadership skills, give you a particular topic, and they will say, okay, then go ahead and address this, and they will assist your leadership. To accompany that, you will actually have a rating sheet with different varying components of leadership. That's a part of the assessment center. If it is that they want to assist your time management skills, they will give you a scenario and give you certain list of things to do and ask you to rate it, and based on the level of importance and how it will impact the productivity and the organization. So that's two out of the way that will evaluate. I could give you possibly a third one where they will give you a scenario to coach someone. Either that person is consistently not adhering to time, or that person is performing below standard. They will see how well create a scenario and as a part of the assessment center, and they will actually simulate you coaching someone to see how well you will listen to that person, to see how well you actually motivate that person, to see your body language, to see if you can actually turn the behavior around. And this is a part of what we call an assessment center, in addition to other components. Now, as an HR practitioner, based on the organization and the role that you want and the competence you want to highlight, you craft all these components, lay them out, and actually have a day or two worth of interview, and you and other persons of a panel will actually rate the performance, and persons with the highest score would actually be selected. Where we are right now, there are different types of assessment center within the BPO and service industry. And I think Rashima, who is online, she actually works with the team who does several forms of assessment centers, and that's now current and seen as very effective. So Rashima, are you online?
Yes, Philip, I'm here. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you, please.
Okay, so
assessment center, go ahead, please.
So as it relates to assessment center, similarly to what you said, it is really based on reviewing performance competencies as well as behavioral competencies. More so the ones that we use now at my organization, we do have the assessment center designed based on the role that the person is going in. So if you have a candidate that's going a leadership role, for example, a team lead, then the assessment center will be designed in such a way to highlight competencies that a team lead would require. And these would go to time management skills, communication skills, providing feedback, conflict management, quality, and so forth. The different activities that are done in the assessment center would be rated by the evaluators. So in an assessment center, you would have a number of persons who are evaluating the activities that the candidates are doing. They would have a rating sheet. each person would have an outline as to how they would rate the person, whether it's at a beginner level, intermediate level, or at the expert level. Then at the end of the assessment center, there will be a calibration of all the assessors. We will come together to identify the scores that are assigned and the final score that will be given to the candidates. And so depending on what the competency is that you're trying to assess, then the activity would match that competency. So I'll give you an example. If it is coaching, then we'll give them a coaching scenario and have the person role play a coaching session. What would you do in such a coaching session where they will have a coachee and they are the coach and go through? For that coaching session, we would look at the way in which they communicate with the person. We would look at whether or not they're open to feedback from the person, as well as we will also look at empathy, whether or not empathy is shared based on what is relayed by the person, and if there are any problem-solving skills that will come out based on the situation. So that is just an example as to one of the methods that we'll use for the coaching competency, as well as if it is that we like to see how persons work in a team, we might give them a game, have them complete the game, and we see how they speak to each other, how they communicate, how they lead the team, if that is what is required. So it is all dependent on the role that the person is going in and what competency would like to see at what level the person will display it.
Okay,
right,
let me clear up something for you all, okay? I don't want you to mistake an assessment plan and an assessment center as being one and the same. It is not, okay? The assessment plan, and in local terms and in smaller companies, you may speak to an interview evaluation sheet. A common name for the assessment plan. And what it is, especially where you have panel interviews, and I guess we will get into that somewhere lower down. The company will decide how they weight the priority areas that they're looking for in the candidate. So in the chart that's up there, they have identified that these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 areas are the priority areas that they're looking for. But they will still further weight them in terms of what is most important. Okay, and you notice that they have given numbers to them in terms of what's most important, etc., etc. And that is the sheet that the interviewer, if it's a single interviewer, will fill out in terms of making the assessments of whether this candidate is suitable or not. Or if it's a panel where you have several persons carrying out the interview, they'll meet at the end of the interview and compare their notes and compare the scores and then come up with the scores. Now, when you speak of an assessment center can be in addition to the interview itself. Okay, the interview being just one component and the things that they're assessed on in the assessment center being another set of components, and then you put the two together to come up with a whole. Now, in other countries, that assessment, going to an assessment center, may be subcontracted to a company. Out here, the only person I know that used to do some of this would have been Semaj. I don't even know if he's still doing it, but he had somewhat of an assessment center, not necessarily a total assessment center. Okay, now from what I hear Rashima saying, and I think that's Digicel, right? Is it Digicel, Rashima?
No, miss. We did assessment centers at Digicel, but what I just explained is what is done at HGS. It's Indusha Global BPO.
Okay, HGS. Okay, so the BPO, that BPO has an assessment, and it's not really an assessment center, because when you have an assessment center is actually set up like a training center. and it has in all the different variables in there for all the different things. Like for instance, pilots have to go back and be relicensed. They go to an assessment center where there's a simulator in there that will take them into heavy wind and heavy snow and heavy fog and that sort of stuff. So in other countries, you actually have assessment centers that are built. What we have here locally is an assessment team who will be given certain roles similar to a panel interview to carry out. There's, as Rashima says, they will give you a scenario about coaching, give you a scenario about leadership, etc., etc. But I don't want you to think that an assessment plan and an assessment center is the same. What I hear us discussing here that goes on locally, it would be a part of the assessment plan based on having a panel that helps to carry out the assessments. But when we have an actual assessment center, it is usually a very structured center where they go and certain simulations are carried out, certain scenarios are carried out. I remember many years ago, the government tried somehow to carry out some of these assessment methods in that, and it was a little bit disturbing because what they did is they'd bring all the candidates together at one time and they would create a scenario. And at the end, they would see, for instance, depending on the position, who demonstrated good leadership, who demonstrated good coaching skills, who was a good team player, and overall they assess who emerged as the leader, for instance, if it was a leadership position that they were looking at, but they would segment all the things. So I don't want you to get confused between an assessment plan and assessors that may be used as part of the assessment plan with an assessment center. Because an assessment center is a very structured area, like how you have a training division, they would have an assessment center. Now, people like the military and the JCF do various types of assessments like this as part of the assessment plan. So I just wanted to sort of clear that up a little bit so that you understand how that is used. But overall, what most companies are doing here locally who are not as sophisticated as some of the BPOs is that they're basically doing an interview evaluation and they'll still set it up weighted like this so that at the end of the day, they can make the comparisons, etc. So I don't know if I've muddied the water there or if I've made it a little clearer. If you still have a question, let me know.
We have something similar.
Who is this? Who is
this?
we?
This is Belinda.
Yes,
I
Belinda.
asked the question. We have something similar in relation to the marine pilots.
Yes.
They do a simulation on how to bring in the ships, how to maneuver in the harbor, and we do it through CMU.
Right, I was going to ask you if it's done through CMU. Yeah. I'm very familiar with that because I have done a lot of work for the Maritime Authority of Jamaica. So I'm very familiar with the fact that CMU has been set up, yes, as an assessment center. They have an assessment center out there. Yeah.
Yes, miss.
Okay. Any other questions?
Good evening, miss. This is an email. I had a question for Philip, but it has subsequently been answered and you further elaborated and cleared it up. I think my next question is for, was it Chantal or Malcolm who spoke about assessment systems? Chantal, can you further explain or explain further what is meant by, I think you spoke about the goals of the assessment tests? Chantal.
Thank you. Thanks, Anna. When we spoke about the assessment goals, when you're doing any assessment, you want to ensure that your hiring decisions are going to be solid. You don't want to regret it. So we're thinking about the recruitment aspect of it. So by conducting an assessment, you're able to do the character profile, which will give you a good idea whether or not the employee or the candidate rather is going to be a perfect, I wouldn't want to say a perfect fit, but a person job fit rather with your organization. So you may look at the aptitude of the person, the suitability, their working style, if they're conscientious. So the instruments that you use would be able to provide some information about that. When we speak about reducing risk, you want to reduce your exposure to possibly the litigations, because you want to ensure that the assessment methods that you're using can actually stand up to scrutiny. And so you want to ensure that even for persons who have disabilities, you make reasonable accommodation for those persons as well. So that's something that you will also want to consider. I would have spoken in terms of what the recruitment cost. So you want it to be reduced. In other words, you don't want to take someone today and within a month or two, or within the probation period, the person up and leaves. So you're going to look at, because you would have to factor in the hourly rate of conducting a next interview, and bear in mind the hourly rate may differ based on the rank of different persons who are sitting on the interview panel. So that is something that you would have to consider. So you really want to ensure that you have the person job fit as well as the person organization fit when you're taking or using an assessment instrument. And you'd also want to think of the employee retention. So how likely will this employee be looking to stay in the organization? So you want to ensure that because there's such, you would have already established from the interview stage that there is some alignment with the values of what this candidate has and what your organization stands for. So you find that this person will make a good addition to the team. So your assessment methods will be able to give you those insights in terms of using these when you're pursuing different positions. I hope I'm answering that question.
Let me step in here a bit, because this is one of the notes I have in terms of this section, and I think it was Malcolm who handled that section, not Chantal. It was Malcolm, okay? This is a very, very important section of your course, and it is one that the entire class is going to have to go back to and read through it very carefully, because it's very important. And I don't think it was quite clear as to the importance of looking at fit, okay? And you have the person to job fit, the person to group fit, the person to organization fit, okay? And the person to vocation fit. It's very, very important that you understand the rationale behind each of the fits. I'm not going to be able, because of the timing, to go into it in detail. But what I'll say to you is that you will have to be very careful in looking at the fits as well when you're interviewing, that you don't allow your personal biases to creep in as well. And we also tell you that there are times when you're going to have to combine two of these fits in order to get the proper fit for the job that you have. Because, for example, if you put in somebody who is just a person to job fit, it doesn't necessarily mean that that person is going to meet the culture, fit the culture of the organization as well. And you find that sometimes when you put in the person to job fit, it's only somebody who's going to come in and do the job, but might not mesh in the organization, might not have the contextual behaviors that we have spoken about, okay? In between performance management and this course, okay? And contextual behaviors are very, very important. So you'll have to sometimes come up with a mix, and it's best that you come up with a mix so that you sometimes look at person to job fit and person to organization fit. And depending on whether you're an organization that has a lot of projects, etc., you might decide, okay, I'm going to weight this Okay, just like how you were weighting the assessment, I'm going to say, okay, I want X percentage of person to job fit, X percentage of person to group fit, meaning this person is a team player, and X percentage of person to organization fit. Or you might say, for instance, I am also going to look at somebody who has the potential to grow. So where am I going to now place the person to vocation fit? I want somebody who over the course of the life with the organization will look at this job as a career. So this is a very, very important area. And I wish that they had used the table that is there to further help explain this. So class, I'm pointing you to table 9-1, which also explains some of the dimensions you look at when you're doing the interview in terms of how you would assess the fit that you want and the percentage of the fit. So for instance, in the person to group fit, your table tells you that, for instance, you'd look at teamwork skills. You'd look at what is this person's expertise relative to the other members of a team that already exists. What is the person's conflict management style? Does this person like team-based work? What is the person's communication skills? Okay. What is the personality related to working well? Now you're going to ask me, how am I going to know all of this? And this is where your interviewing skills, which will come in later on, your interviewing skills are very, very important. Persons who are recruiters, as we have heard in the class, must have good interviewing skills. And you have to sit down and map out your interview questions, depending on the job at hand, so that you know at the end of the day whether you have made the best selection and you have not selected the best of the worst. So the person to job fit and understanding how to use those approaches is very, very important. Otherwise, as you heard, you end up with selecting somebody who may only be there for a year or who may not even make it through the probationary period. And therefore you end up with a lot of costs, etc. So I'd like to point you back to this chapter. It's very, very important that you understand how this is used and what it means in terms of the whole matter of recruitment. Okay. Now, I'm going to take one more question and then I'll go to my overall part.
Mrs. Mitchell, good night. I had about 3 questions, but I'll ask one question in the interest of time.
And let's see if we can get them handled,
Okay, so my first question, I believe it's Nicola when she was speaking about interpreting data. And she was speaking about percentile, and she mentioned that percentile score is not the same as percentage. I'm not so sure what the difference is between both, and I didn't get a clarification or what's the difference between percentile score versus percentage. Is that something you can explain, Nicola, please?
Okay, Michelle, thank you very much for your question. All right. Percentile is not the same as percentage. Percentage means your score out of 100. But for percentile is converted into an expression of percentage of people who scored at or below that score. And that score means the score at 0 standard deviation. So for my example, that deviation was 50. Let me check the table back. Oh, the example I gave was for Sue at 55 and 120. So her percentile was 84 percentile. And this was above the score of the 0 standard deviation. Or that's the percentage of persons. Let me see. That was the percentage of persons within the area of 0 to +1 standard deviation. I hope I answered.
In other words, there is a formula, Michelle, you need to go back in your book and sit with it. There's a formula, okay? And in the essence of time, there's a formula that shows you how to convert from percentage to percentile.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. R. My last question is under initial or screening methods. I remember Philip speaking about telephone screening, and he had given an example, which is Digicel, where he did screening for customer care. I know it's bulk recruitment. When Digicel is doing customer care, they're doing like 300 candidates. So I wanted to know how effective and efficient it was to sit and screen over 300 persons to get 150 from that amount, because again, you would have to be trained. So you would need sufficient persons to be trained in that area, because I did not know of that happening. So how effective and efficient was that, Philip, to screen and score? You said it was like a mini interview, all 200 and odd or 300 and odd candidates to call them in for an interview.
Okay, thanks for that question, Michelle. It was a practice that we found very efficient, because it was actually one that maximized on the return on investment, as well as reduce the attrition rate for the skills that are required, particularly for a customer service agent. Now, during the period when I did it, we did not only rely on the recruitment HR department to facilitate. Just a quick moment, please. My battery is dying. One moment. I have to answer. My apologies. Thank you very much. I just had to catch my battery there. Now, as I was saying, we did not only depend on the HR department as well as the recruiter and the recruiters to do that. How the training was set up at the time is that the quality assurance and training department was actually responsible for the training and recruitment, as once they submitted their application and they had the basic qualifications such as the CXC subjects or a particular level of education or certification in customer service, the persons from the quality and assurance department would actually assist in the screening process, because what happened is that the termination of contract did not rely on the HR department. However, based on the qualifications and you passing a certain number of tests as administered by the training department. So for example, if you fail 3 tests, it means that you would automatically be eliminated here by a contract, or if you are absent for a particular time. So what happens is that when the trainers who know what they're looking for would actually assist in that recruitment process, in screening process, in terms of diction, pronunciation, asking, they would partner with the HR department. And when they get a good set of candidates, we found that the attrition would be very low, because we've actually already eliminated one process where we know persons are actually able to deliver on the job there. Often when that is not done and you're taking persons in bulk interviews, you find that they lack certain fundamental skills. They're not able to communicate well over the phone. They do not display a particular willingness to assist. They are not customer service driven. So that is how it worked when they actually partnered, the HRD partnered with the quality assurance and training to assist with the screening process, because speech and diction is very important as a customer service representative.
Philip, I'm not sure, unless I'm misunderstanding something, I'm not sure that the question was answered directly.
No, miss.
Who asked the question?
I did, Michelle.
And the way I interpret it, she asked why did you have to do 300, or how were you able to do 300?
Yeah, how long did it take?
To get, what was it, 50?
So miss, how it is, it's
let me explain something about pre-screening, okay? At one stage in my life, I was a recruiter, you know, as a young person. When I lived in the US, my first actual job in HR was as a recruiter. I recruited at over 290 colleges every year in the US. And the aim of the pre-screening interview is to pre-qualify persons, yes, who could come in for proper interviews, okay? And there is you learn a technique, okay? And you set how many you think you need to talk to. Sometimes I would have to talk to 100 to get maybe 20, okay? Now, you're going to see even when you go down to making offers, there's a technique. And you will see even when you go down to making offers, it tells you, in order to get a certain amount, you have to do a certain amount. So basically, in his case there, he was looking at 300, which is a little outside of the norm to get 50 usually, but depending on what the market is like, the labor market might actually predetermine for you what you have to look at. Okay, if it is a case that there is a shortage of that particular skill and the competition is high, like for instance, if you are a BPO and you're down in the Montego Bay area is a big hub, bigger than Kingston for BPOs. And you might find that, yes, you might have to pre-screen 300 to get 50 or 100 because of what's happening with the labor market down there. Between the hotels also compete for some of the same type of talent, the hotel industry, okay, that the BPO is competing for. So when you telephone screen, you may have 4 or 5 questions that you ask. You single out your priority questions and you have 4 or 5 questions that you ask because, yes, you want to see if communication skills are there, you want to see if grammar is there, you know, etc. So you use that as a method of pre-screening, as it says, to be able to bring in persons for interviews. And over a period of time, I would imagine 300 would be done in like a week. I don't know what period of time was that done in, Philip?
That amount of time, as I said, we estimated how many persons will you need to require, and we found the ratio of training and quality persons to assess the screen down to bring a particular number.
Philip, you're not answering the question. How long did it take your company to pre-screen 300 persons to get the 50? How long did it take them?
Within the week, miss.
Right. Well, that is what I said to her. That is what I said, that in my experience, the 300 would take about a week. So that is the answer, Philip. That is the answer. Okay, has nothing to do with contracts at that stage and that sort of stuff. Has nothing to do with it. It's a technique, and usually you have to be good at it, and you might have more than one person actually doing the pre-screening for the same group. In other words, if you had 3 or 4 or 5 persons in the recruiting department, some of the BPOs have a recruiting area, and if you have 3, 4, 5 assistants in there, it might be divided up between the 3, 4, or 5 of them. One person does not do the 300. So Philip is telling you that it was divided up, but it was divided up even outside of the recruiting area. Some went to training, some went to quality, some went to whatever, okay, in terms of doing the pre-screening. Okay, have your 3 questions been answered? Michelle,
yes,
right?
Miss. Yes, Miss. Thank
okay. All right, let me close off the question and answer area because technically we have 15 minutes, but we're going to be here for about 10 minutes after, based on what has taken place. Okay, give them a hand. Let's give them a hand as we always do. Give them a hand. Let's give them a clap. Okay.
Miss, I'm going to stop sharing.
Why you want to do that?
Okay.
All right, go ahead. Okay. Go ahead. Stop sharing. Go ahead. Let's bring up everybody as a class. Go ahead. Okay. Evening. Here we are. We can see everybody. We can see everybody now.
Miss, good evening.
Good evening. Who is this?
This is Suzanne. Chantal Artwell is apologizing for absence this evening.
Really? Well, she needs to tell me why.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, first of all, you guys have attempted to put a lot of information together. I don't know exactly what went wrong, but some things went wrong. Okay, I don't know what happened. I should first of all ask you guys, what happened with your time management? Let me address that part quickly. What happened with your time management? What do you think happened? Group, I'm asking a question. What do you think happened with your time management?
Darker?
Who is speaking?
Chantal Hardy here.
Okay, Chantal.
I think most of the time was wanting the class to have a better understanding and appreciation of, let's say, the graphs that were in the measurement chapter. So I think possibly some of the time was really spent there, as it was evident, of course, throughout the presentation based on the time that we started chapter 9.
Go ahead.
So we really wanted to have the class having an understanding about what these diagrams mean and be intimate with it to an extent, So that's something that we really stressed on.
But I just don't think that's necessarily where you lost the time. I don't think that's where you lost the time. I think you started off with a loss of time. I took into account, of course, the 10 minutes that the class didn't start, okay, because we were kind of waiting and chatting there. I took that into account. I gave you back, I mean, I was prepared to take that out of my time at the end. I gave you back that 10 minutes. But time management is very, very important because this kind of really went astray, which meant that chapter 9 was not properly discussed at all. Nicola, you have raised your hand. Nicola?
Yes, miss.
You raised your hand.
I wanted to give my views on why we took so long.
Okay.
Because we're trying to make the material relevant to our happenings nowadays. We didn't want it to seem as if it was just something to just read and understand, but something applicable to our HR as HR practitioners. So I think I'm trying to explain and to expound on the points.
No, you gave some good examples, and that is expected. I mean, that is a plus. But I think there were sections, and in the essence of time, I just cannot go through all of it, but there are sections where people kind of went off on a tangent. Okay, there were some sections where folks kind of went off a bit, okay? And you lost sight of time. Now, think, for instance, if you had gone to a conference to present and you were given an hour and a half to make this presentation, what do you think would have happened to you? They would have just stopped you, They would have just stopped you because then you have an impact on all the other presenters coming behind you. So when you rehearse your presentations, and this is another thing, I don't think I'm getting a sense that your presentation was not rehearsed among the group. And I'll tell you why I'm saying that. I'm trying to bring up the whole screen here, but unfortunately I can't. Why I would say to you that, okay, there we go. Why I would say to you that I'm getting a feeling that this presentation was not rehearsed is because your slide changes were extremely weak. Extremely, extremely weak. You cannot be presenting as a group and having to call out next slide, next slide, next slide. And that is telling me that your presentation was not rehearsed. Okay? Because obviously there was problems between whoever was manipulating the slides for you and knowing when next to go and that sort of stuff. That was very distracting. Okay? Because You know, we had to wait to hear next slide, you know, that sort of stuff. So you have to be careful. I mean, you can have the best content in the world, you know, and you lose it because you can't present it, you don't present it well, and your presentation skills are not there. There is something that you sent me that, unless I missed something, I didn't hear you tell the group that you had developed a glossary and that the glossary is on Orville for their use. I didn't hear a word about this glossary. I took a brief look at the glossary, and the intentions to put the glossary together are good, but that is not how you put a glossary together. It's a very difficult document to migrate through, because when you're going to do a glossary, if you look even in the back of your book where you have a glossary, you notice that terms are bolded and then the explanation is there, whatever. Not this kind of running stuff that you have put together there. The intention was very good, but I think it's a difficult document to migrate through. Okay, so I wanted to point that out to you. The other thing about the presentation, it came to me very late last night. I didn't see it until this morning, and I already had an appointment out of here for most of the day today. This is why I asked that, you know, the things be sent to me in reasonable time. I think I had a 6 o'clock deadline, did I, on that? But up to now, I cannot save your presentation. I've had to keep keep it open on my screen. It will not allow me to save, so I need you to go back and see what the problem is with it, because I cannot save it. It is telling me that you have used some fonts that cannot be saved. I don't know what it is. I can only read it on screen. I'm not able to save it. So I don't know if that is the same experience anybody has had in Orville or UVRLA, whether any of you, has anybody gone into Orville to try to save the presentation? Did anybody go in there to try to save it?
I didn't.
Miss, they
Pardon me?
sent us.
Somebody saying yes?
They sent us the presentation and the glossary along with our release. So I got it from the WhatsApp group and it downloaded for me.
And you were able to save it and open it?
Right.
Well, I don't know what I got. I cannot save, and I've tried it on more than one computer and I cannot save it. It will not allow me to save it. So I don't know what happened in the email, because mine came to me by email. Okay, so I need your group to go back and look at what is wrong with it, because I need to be able to save it for the university records as well. And tomorrow I will ask Miss Thomas to go into Orville, because we still cannot access Orville unless she opens and puts me in. We still cannot open. That's a university problem. Okay. But I need to make sure that it can be saved. And the note pages I spoke last week about the use of the note page area. And I guess you guys just didn't bother to pay attention to it, because the note pages are all over the place. They're outside of the frame, and in some cases, you have a very large font in one part of a note page, and then a smaller font in another part of the note page. And I mean, as I said, I'm reading it on screen. I have it open on another computer here, and I've been looking at it on screen. And
Excuse me.
Yes?
Miss, I'm not sure if it is that there is a version issue, because none of us had that problem, and we double checked our note section and it was all in line. It was all at the same font size. It was aligned. The points were there, so I'm not sure what's happening.
Well, I am telling you, I've opened it both in Windows 10 and Windows 8, and it has the same problems. So I don't know whether it's the version that you mailed to me, but it's like that. Okay.
As a point of interjection, Miss, if I may, For the points, we actually did share the glossary with the team in our group and they accepted and acknowledged it, Miss. And as
I'm not saying you didn't share it, Philip. That's not what I said. That's not what I said, Philip. I said in the presentation, I didn't hear you tell the class that there is a glossary and the use of the glossary, and that the glossary, you know, yes, you put up the use on Orville so that they may use the glossary to understand some of the terms, etc. I didn't say you didn't share it with your group. I'm speaking to the class overall.
No, with the
that
class
as part of the presentation, you should have mentioned that you have done a glossary. To just say you put the glossary in Orville, so what was the group to understand why the glossary was there? You did that as an additional thing, but I didn't hear you mention it in your anywhere in the presentation tonight. I'm asking you if I missed something. Was it mentioned in the presentation?
Not in the presentation, but in our chat group, Miss. They know that it's there and they acknowledged it.
When you say your group, Philip, group 6, or are you referring to the class?
The entire class, Miss.
Right, but you're making a presentation. So if the glossary is one of the items, it should have been mentioned in the presentation. If you intend the glossary to be something that I am going to take into consideration in my grading or whatever, then you needed to have mentioned it in the presentation.
Noted.
In the same way, those slides that you were using in the middle of the question and answer, those slides are part of the presentation?
Yes, Miss, we did, because we wanted to be interactive when we shared it with the group so they could refer to it.
But those slides, I'm trying to see if I missed something. Maybe I missed something. Were those slides in the presentation itself?
Yes, Miss, and it was sent to you. This is the one that was sent to you.
No, you're not answering my question. Tonight, when you presented, those slides that you brought up back in the question and answer, they were in the presentation tonight? Or they're extra slides?
No, they're in the presentation, Miss.
Okay, well, I'll have to go back and look for them then.
Yes.
Okay. But as I said, I don't know what it is. I can't, I can download the presentation and read it on screen, but it will not save and allow me to open it.
We saved it as well, Miss, and as a check for we're using the same document, the one that was projected. If Latoya could show it in not presentation mode, we checked the font sizes and they're aligned as we opened it and saved it.
Well, if I could take a screenshot and show you, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because you emailed it, but all the note pages are, most of them are outside of the note page view. Most of them are outside the note page view. But apart from that, my bigger concern is that I cannot save this presentation and open it. Okay, it allows me to edit it, and I did that. I told it enable editing so that I can save it, and I can save it, but I cannot open it. I don't know what is wrong with it, but I need to be able to save it. I've not had that experience with any of the other presentations, so I don't know what is wrong. So you might want to call and discuss that with me. Anyway, let me.
Yes, Doc, we will walk you through the process. Huh?
Well, it's not a matter of walking me through the process, because as I said, I have not had that problem with any of the other presentations. One presentation that I've had a problem with had to do with the amount of backgrounding they had. Therefore, it was too big a presentation to send, and they had to send it in Google Drive, and some parts of it would not open in Google Drive, etc. Okay, but I don't know what this is, and I work with presentations every day, so I'm not sure what has gone on here. So you need to get in touch with me so that I can see what it is. Let's see if I can pinpoint what is wrong. As I said, I have a lot of concerns with the last half of the presentation with chapter 9. I can't tell you that I'm happy with chapter 9. I'm not happy with the presentation on chapter 9. And chapter 9 is one of the most critical parts of this course. Therefore, I'm requesting that the class go through and read the note pages that have been put up and go to the slides that I have and read your book, because chapter 9 is a very important chapter. Again, a summary was done at the end without any slides, just speaking through and expecting everybody to remember everything that was being done in that recap. And I think I asked last week that that not be done, because in due fairness to the class, you know, some people are good note takers, some may not be. So to make the points from your recap, some people might call to do that. But I see the work that you put in, and I see the intentions. It's just a pity that, you know, some of the little mechanics just didn't work well. And as I said, my biggest concern is the time management, and you guys should have picked that up. You know, fine if you run over 5 or 6 minutes, I'm not going to kill you for that, you know, but when you go over like 20, 25 minutes, I mean, then it affects the rest of the activities for the evening. Hence our question and answer. Yes, fortunately we got some good questions in the 3 persons, 4 persons that asked, but it tore into the question and answer period. So, you know, I'm not sure whether the group, the class as a whole, you know, understood everything or whatever, because I can't tell participation levels. But again, you put in a lot of work, and as I said to you before, this feedback should always be taken constructively. It is meant that way, so that when you're doing presentations, again, it's important for you to rehearse them and to go back, and sometimes you have to chip and chop and whatever, instead of maybe giving examples for one topic, you say, okay, let us select the best example, and we give one example, and you give it concisely, and you move along. And don't go back in the middle of the presentation and summarize what has been done from that time to that point when you are presenting. That is how you lose some of the time. Okay, like in the middle of the presentation, I think it is Philip who went back, and you're summarizing from beginning to that point. No, the summary comes at the end. So that is how you lose some of your time, some of those styles. You know, the summary is done at the end, but you can't in the middle decide, I'm going to summarize from chapter 1 to chapter 5 so that I can present chapter 6. No, that's not, you shouldn't really do that. So I think some of it is techniques. Okay, but as I said, it's a learning experience, and you will learn from it, and hopefully you'll be able to use it in future presentations, you know, in your workplace and stuff, and, you know, pick up on it. But you needed to have rehearsed this so that you could have looked at where to chip and chop to be within even 5 minutes or 6 minutes. I'm not going to penalize you for 5 or 6 minutes. You know, I'll take it out of my time at the end, etc. Okay, but you can't run over like that. And remember, you know, this is not a brand new scenario. This scenario has been done every year. Okay, these presentations exactly like this, I can show you the layouts going way back, and they've worked, so I have kept them. So it's not that you are the first persons doing this where you have, you know, 2 topics to present in the hour and a half, and I balance them. I know that it works, so that's why I'm able to balance them like that. So you just have to look at presentation style a little bit without losing quality and content. Okay, any questions? Any questions? All is not lost, all right? But I have to give you that feedback. All is not lost, okay? Any questions, any comments?
Just thank you for your feedback. We appreciate that.
Okay, you're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, we have to send out some communication to you about those classes, as you heard me asking Ms. Thomas this evening. Dr. Taylor has COVID, but we're not sure what state he's in now. So whether we use Zoom or we use Blackboard, that is what we have to decide on. Okay, so she and I will have to talk tomorrow to see, because we had, was it three classes? I think it's 3 classes that we would have had to go to Blackboard on, but is it 2? Let me
Yeah, the
see,
2 Thursday classes.
2 Thursday classes, right? So let me discuss it with her to see what is happening. I may have a complication with our class on, where's my thing here? Wait, let me just find our my timetable here. I'm not going to keep you much longer. Where's my timetable? Okay. I may have a little difficulty with our class on the 13th, which is the last class. I'm keeping my fingers crossed and hoping that I don't have a complication, but I have a very, very bad family situation on that day. So I am hoping and that all goes well and that I can have the class on that day. Okay, but the 13th of April is a very, very bad day. Okay, so I will discuss it with Miss Thomas to see whether I can possibly move that day or what. Okay, because it's not something that I have any control over. Okay, but tomorrow I'll talk with her and we'll straighten out what we have to straighten out. Okay, but all is not lost, so go home in peace. Okay, this is why we're here. This is why you come to school, for these things to happen sometimes, and they do happen and whatever. But as I said to you, all is not lost. You're not going to fail. All right. Let me tell you straight up front, you will not fail, but I want you to pay attention to these points. Okay.
Noted, and thanks, Miss. Can you just let us know when we can meet about saving the slides off air?
Yeah, I have to be out of here tomorrow morning for a little bit. I don't know if you have time in the day, because I'm gonna play with them again tonight, but I've tried it using, I thought it might have been because of Windows 10, you know. I thought maybe then let me go to another computer that has 8 Word 8, you know, Word 10, and I'm having the same experience with it. It's giving me all kinds of messages and I don't know why. I'm going to try saving it as well on a different external drive, and let me see if also that makes a difference. Okay, there just wasn't enough time for me today. Based on when I got it, there wasn't enough time for me. Last night I would have played around with it, but there wasn't enough time for me today. But I'll try it again, and I'll try a different external drive and see. Let me try some of those things and see what happens first. Okay. All right.
Okay, Miss.
Okay. So I'll see you all on Wednesday, God's willing. By the way, how are our recuperating persons doing? Antonia, Rashima, you're doing good, Antonia?
Yes, I am. I'm much better now.
Good. Rashima, how are you?
Rashina.
Rashina, how are you?
Miss, I'm getting better. Still congested. Not smelling much, but I'm getting better.
Okay, as long as you're not deteriorating. And then there was is it Chantel? Is it Chantel? Who was the other person? Kadina.
Hi, Miss. I'm much better now.
Good.
Thank
Well,
you for
guys,
asking.
yes, you guys continue to improve, please. I hope there's nobody else ill. Is there anybody else ill now? Anybody else ill?
Cashel was missed, but she's doing much better.
Cashel, okay. It's Kadina and Cashel. Okay, okay, good, good, good. Okay, well, you all try and stay well, please, 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 please.
You too, Miss.
Yes, I'm trying real hard. I'm trying real hard. I feel like a bit of a prisoner, but I'm trying real hard. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I'll see you all on Wednesday. Okay.
Okay, Miss.
God's willing. All right. Night, night.
Have a
Good night, Miss. Good
Have a
night,
blessed
guys.
night, everyone.
Night.
Good night.
Night.